recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. Ms. Shipman, I was taken by your comment about when you were a young person and went to Columbia from the Midwest that you were taught how to think, not what to think. And in that context, we're dealing with a complex issue, historically, thousands of years. In this instance, but the use of technology and political consultants, the theater of today, is quite remarkable, where you have a real legitimate, and I appreciate the bipartisan focusing on the legitimate issues around hatred and prejudice. So, but the technology to me is really fascinating. What makes this so unique to our time in this institution? Professor, have you looked at that in terms of social media and how we are, there's a lot of work around this in this field, not in this specific field, by researchers at UVA, Harvard, I think of Susan Lin, her wonderful book about who's minding our kids, how we're using what we've discovered about neuroscience, including prejudice and hatred and emotion, and using technology to make it much worse for very narrow political reasons. Have you looked at that? And I'd like to follow up, given your history, Ms. Shipman, in your career, about how things have changed in that regard, about how people get information and how it's manipulated as we, as a culture and a civilization, try to figure out what the guardrails are and the damage it causes in the meantime. Start with you, Professor.
This is a question for me, right,
no,
sir?
First for you. Have you looked at social media
Yes.
and how people get information?
Congressman, it is very important that you raise that issue, because one of the most frustrating aspects of this is that people are posting anonymously, and they are posting absolutely horrible, horrible things. And so there are frustrations for all of us in trying to figure out how to stop that. But more fundamentally, we are very mindful of the destructive aspect of this hate speech on social media.
And it's not organic in many ways. It's deliberately directed by people who want to divide people and create problems. Have you looked at that? And I'm thinking of a book, The Chaos Machine, by a New York Times reporter who was the person who actually reported that YouTube was directing adolescent girls right to the point where they could be, through their depression and anxiety, to show them how to commit suicide. So this is being used in these political environments, is my point right now.
It's very troubling, yes.
Shipman, and the point that it's not organic, that it's quite deliberate, whether it's people in Russia or people in the United States doing this to people to divide us, as opposed to your career or how it's evolved from your career.
I have a lot of thoughts about this, so I'm just trying to gather my thoughts. I think this is an issue that our university has been investigating for a long time in terms of the science, the neuroscience, the flow of information at our journalism school. We have so many ways to look at this in an important way for our society. I know we're working with a Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa, on this issue right now of disinformation. But I'll say a couple of things. I think the most fundamental thing I've learned in my time on the board at Columbia is that, and this is from our incredible Mind-Brain Behavior Institute, which is just cutting-edge neuroscience, when people feel fear and intimidation, they can't learn. And so I think I come back to the topic of this hearing, that we can look at all of the reasons why there's certainly new ways we all hate each other in our society right now that are distressing. But I think if we cannot provide fundamental safety for our students, we now know, we're not just guessing, that we're not allowing them to learn.
And I wonder if you have any comments or observations.
Congressman, you are absolutely right that social media is part of the problem and on this particular issue, we have seen it as pernicious. I am particularly uncomfortable with some of the anonymous channels, things like side chat. Every student I meet, I tell them, please get off side chat, it's poisonous. And probably the most egregious cases that we've seen of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racist comments have been on social media, on those anonymous channels, and we would welcome any improvement in content moderation, which would reduce that.
No, I really appreciate that. I'm struck by this in the previous hearing, that I wonder what Brandeis and Holmes would be talking about if they were alive today, and their context of very similar economic and world strife time in World War I, where when they were discussing what is free speech and screaming fire in a crowded theater, I see the social media companies and technology companies as being those folks who are benefiting from strife. And this is sort of an extreme example of how they're monetizing us fighting against one another in a very, very difficult position where I think we would all agree that hatred and prejudice cannot be tolerated. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr.